alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Hello and welcome to Alive After Reading. I'm your host, Tim Niederreiter, and with me today is a new guest to the podcast, but not to the audio sphere that I inhabit, Ron Lahr. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, Ron, we hung out with Joe Compton and a fair number of other folks on New Year's Eve this year. Last year, I guess. Gosh, it's so confusing. Anyway, it was New Year's Day by the time I signed off. But for the less time-dependent aspect of the show, tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and what you do.
All right. Well, my name is...
In fiction, because you do a lot of stuff.
I do a lot of stuff. I mean, gardening, car restoration, ridiculous things. Cooking, baking. But for writing, I write mostly fantasy, but I do have a humorous science fiction novel coming out next month. You Get What You Steal. And then, but I have a trilogy, the Kindle Chronicles, and that's my main thing, the fantasy. And I'm doing a box set for hopefully March, and then an anthology that'll take place in the world of the Kindle Chronicles. A bunch of authors are writing for. I'm very excited about that. And then I also write some humor. I have a horrible book called You're as Stupid as You Are Fat, How to Talk to Women, that I wrote under a pseudonym. So like this character just took over, and he's such a dick. I mean, he's so awful. And it's full of very politically incorrect stuff. And but I laugh when I read it. So all my stuff has a lot of humor. The fantasy trilogy is a first-person point of view told by Dirk, who's also a thief, because apparently all my books have to have a thief as a main character. And
we all have our patterns.
he's a jerk. He's kind of like the guy who is the pseudonym or character that wrote You're as Stupid as You Are Fat, but less awful. He's like a more subdued version of him, and it's basically him telling you the story. And one reviewer called him an unreliable narrator, because it's like if you were sitting in a bar with somebody, and people they embellish every story, they build up their own importance to things, and so you never know if what he's telling you is exactly what happened. But since he's the only guy telling it, he gets to tell it his way, and he's just a sarcastic guy. And so I think there's fun. I mean, it is definitely an epic fantasy, trilogy, but there is, I mean, he is a smartass and makes fun of his friends and builds himself up, and but there is a lot of, I mean, it's a classic quest thing. They're trying to save the world, and him a little grudgingly, because he's before the first book starts, he's just a thief, and he's just trying to help his best friend, who interestingly enough, when I first wrote it like 30 years ago or something, his friend was the main character, and he's a real good guy, and it was third person, and it was I liked the story, but I didn't love the book, if you follow.
Now I know what you're saying exactly. And go on. It
was frustrating because I wanted to love it, and I tried rewriting it over the years, but I also had a career and family and all that. And so once my youngest moved out, I started rewriting it, and I decided to try just for giggles with Dirk as the main character, and all of a sudden I loved it. And
I just fit into place. Yeah.
And
it's like, where you been all this time, dude? Right there, it turns out. You've been right there.
Yeah, and then I had the love of it to write the second and third books and publish it, because I never published the first version because it didn't sing in my heart, and so that's what I write.
Well, that's
science fiction turns into a trilogy as well.
Okay, cool.
I wrote that with a friend, and we have to see if we can do that. It's a lot harder. I love collaborating, but it's so time consuming.
Yeah, no, I hear that. I mean, I've never really collaborated much because I'm kind of a control freak when it comes to my stories and my settings. I like. I think I've relaxed a little bit about it as I get older, especially because I run RPGs in a lot of my settings for my friends and stuff. So when I do that, I have to be like, well, this is like an alternative version of the setting, or like it doesn't matter what happens here, we're just going to roll with it because it's helped me be a little less precious about my story worlds and stuff. But it's
the thing
tough.
I love about it is you build a setting together, you build characters, but your partner, your writing partner, comes up with things that if you picked a good partner, surprise you and that you love, and that make it so different from what it would have been if it was just you. And I believe in the case of You Get What You Steal, I mean, much better than if I had just tried to write it. He's a very creative and funny guy, and it's a little more goofy than the humor I normally write. Not well. You're as stupid as you are fat's pretty goofy, but in terms of
but more than the fantasy, yeah.
I mean, I have like plans for a 14-book, series in there of trilogies and different things, and kind of like the Recluse, novels, different characters featured, and different times on the timeline in the world.
Oh yeah.
And stuff. And so that's my real heavy focus, but. There are some things in You Get What You Steal that I just think are brilliant that my co-author wrote, and that's of course very frustrating that I didn't come up with it. But you just get something that neither one of us would have written, and separately, and that's very fun. And the downside is, we're getting a cover made, and I would have accepted the cover a long time ago, and. But we both have to agree on.
Yes.
So
you have to turn both keys there.
I feel bad for the artist, the cover artist. I apologized last time. I'm like, we're so close, but we need to see different colors in the back. Highlighting the drop shadow of the text on the cover.
Oh no.
For me, it's real nitpicky, but this is his kind of his first big book he's trying to get out, so he's.
I mean, that's fair. So you get used to it after a while. Like, I guess I got to say I don't hire cover designers because I do my own covers, but I at least I do now because I finally got decent at it. I had to buy a few covers to figure out what worked because I had been making them for a while and they were bad. My initial covers were awful, like a lot of people's are when they try to make their own, and eventually I got pretty decent at it.
Mine would be awful stick figure covers.
Well, I don't do art. I don't draw the covers or anything. I'm not an artist. But I use Photoshop. I got good at Photoshop, so I can,
yeah, I'm
just stuff like that.
I suck at it.
Well, again,
the art in Canva for a promo. I do Story Origin to build my newsletters, and just to make that is an unpleasant task. It's very
no, Canva is pretty easy compared to Photoshop, so I hear you there. It's pretty simple. But anyway, as far as you said something earlier about how your main character for your fantasy series originally was like a side character, like the best friend character, and that really rings true to me. I've done that several times where I'm like, I think this should be the main character initially, and then in the planning stage of the book. Which, even though I'm not an outliner, I do plan books a little bit. Like, I have a premise, and then I fool around with the premise a little bit. I'm like, okay, what if this character is the protagonist? And then often that's all it takes, and then suddenly I have a new story. And that's happened to me a few times. Like, my Shifter Empire books, the main character was originally going to be, it's very similar to yours. Like, it's a fantasy series. Originally, the main character was going to be who ended up being the main character's best friend, basically. Yeah.
Very similar.
Yeah, very similar. Of course, that one I was only playing for 5 days, but go on.
So my world was created because of AD&D, when I played in high school, and I created the world, and I'm not a great DM, but what I loved was the world building. So I have this gigantic amount of information, some of it ridiculously detailed that'll never show up in any story. I mean, it may. But it's not necessarily relevant. But boy, did I dig in. And then years later, I was like, I have this world. Is there no story I want to tell about it? And I love reading fantasy. I mean, and so I wondered, well, what would happen in a world where the gods are real and there's no sensible person that would deny the existence of the gods because they can, materialize
smite you,
plane,
cut you down if they want.
Yeah, there's rules about that, but I'm like, what would the people who are atheists in this world, in real life, what would they do in a fantasy world where the gods are real? Would they just be like, oh, well, then I guess, there's proof, so I have to believe in them? Would they worship them, or would they not like it? And that led to the underlying story for the first trilogy. There are people who, they don't disbelieve in the gods, but they're like, the gods are like, our parents, and we need, we move out of our basements or in this case, carriage house, and and stand on our own 2 feet. And they deny the gods, but they don't, they won't worship them, and they oppose them, but they don't, they know they're real. And so,
I mean, at risk of getting a little philosophical there, I think it makes sense. I mean, it actually makes a lot of sense. Like, if there's something you can go and talk to that says it's the creator of the universe or something, well, do you really trust that thing to be telling you the truth? That creature, whatever it is,
right? We can't rely on them. I don't want them holding us back as a species, or and it's kind of their thing. Unfortunately, they're also kind of bloodthirsty, and they're murdering priests and infiltrating things. So and the gods' reaction is very destructive towards them. So the humans, dwarves, and elves, they're trying to stop the Cathaldi, because if they don't, they're afraid the gods are going to destroy the world.
Oh, there's that issue.
So that's to me a compelling reason.
Fair enough.
I don't want to die and have my family and friends and everything I know be destroyed. But I mean,
it's a good start anyway, right? I mean, motivations wise, you can go deeper, but it can't go much bigger.
No, and of course on the micro level, it's I want to help my friends. And the previous main character and Dirk are friends from childhood, and they're it's the other character who discovers that the Cathaldi still exist. They thought the gods had wiped him out 400 years ago. The Cathaldi are trying to kill him, and he's like, well, I gotta save my friend. I gotta help him. So he has motivation on the micro and the macro level.
Cool. Yeah, I mean,
but he also thinks it'll get him women and freedom.
So there's that too. There's the superficial, like, there's a lot of advantages here.
Exactly.
The world's not destroyed, and I could get the other things that I want.
And ladies.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I've been married since I was a kid, not to the same woman, but to 2 different women, sequentially. But I'm most of my adult life I've been married, so I am not a womanizer at all. So it is fun to write a character who does not. I mean, I'm like Mr. Commitment and family guy, and he is not those things in many ways. And it's fun because I mean, why not? What's the point of writing if you're not having fun with things that you can't do?
Yeah. I mean, I do similar things. Like, I mean, but I like to write, immortal characters and stuff, and obviously, at least materially, none of us are immortal. That kind of thing,
We'll see.
Oh, we'll see. But come on,
I'm not dead yet.
That's true. And neither am I. I mean, I suppose, yeah. But eventually, somebody. The scary part is eventually somebody might listen to this and find out that one or both of those statements might be false. But anyway, that's just over a long enough time period. Whatever, that Fight Club line. Never mind.
I'm kind of counting on robot bodies.
I mean, that'd be nice, right? Maybe.
On wood. Come on, science.
Yeah, but I always liked Ghost in the Shell when I was a kid. The anime. But anyway, those guys, even they have diseases in their cyber brains and stuff. So I mean, which is, I think, probably a pretty good guess.
Yeah, I'm not saying I would stay sane. I'm just saying, that
I mean, like the kind of disease that can kill you, though, is what I meant. Like in that shit,
well,
in that. Yeah, it's no good. It's just like, oh yeah, and now I need to defragment my brain, and something went wrong, and I'm dead, basically. Anyway, that's a bit of a tangent right there, a classic tangent of this show. But I have had science fiction on my mind a lot lately, even though I write both science fiction and fantasy. And most I've been writing fantasy. I'm like, wow, it feels urgent to go back to science fiction for some reason right now. Maybe it's because I'm 3 fantasy books deep at the moment. Written 3 books in 2 different series in a row. They were all fantasy.
As my writing career progresses, and I have more books come out, I do have plans for some other science fiction beyond the collaborative, Big Steel series. I do love it, although for fantasy, it's the same reason I love the Klingons in Star Trek. In real life, honor doesn't seem to matter much to most people. Like, I went to a liberal arts college where the entire first year you're studying the works of the great ancient Greeks for the most part, and all they talk about is honor and the good and being noble. And yet at this school you couldn't leave, and everybody had to take the same. It was a set curriculum, so everybody went through that first year, and all it is talk about the good, and even in the future years, but really heavily with the ancient Greeks. And yet you couldn't leave anything in the coat room outside the cafeteria because somebody would steal it. So I mean, like 24/7 you're talking about being noble, and yet everybody was a piece of shit. Not everybody, but and in fantasy there's usually that basic struggle of good and evil. Not all fantasy, but it's so prevalent. And I don't know if it's because of my schooling or what, but those thoughts and concerns are in my head a lot. I think a lot about how we talk about doing the right thing, and yet we all, or at least, we all fall short of that.
Yeah.
And are petty and easily corruptible, and I mean, like, if somebody came up to me and was like, "I'll give you a truckload of money if you write this," you sell out, and I would be like,
yeah, do something you would normally never want to do. Yeah,
I'll write a romance novel for $1 million, sure, whatever. Something I'm not interested in, not to dump on them, but it's just something I'm not interested in, and I'm also awful at romance, so my books would be just a declaration to the world of how bad I am at being romantic and at the acts involved and related to sex. Like, these are the least imaginative sex scenes ever. This guy is so boring.
It reads like he's been married to 2 people his whole life.
Yeah, please don't check with
at different times.
Current wife or ex-wife about my skill level.
Sorry about that.
I don't. Just pretend that was a joke and not a real, honest confession.
It was a joke. It was a joke.
Thank you.
We're gonna roll with that. I'm not pretending. I heard that. Or I heard it that way. See, unlike Ron here, I am a big time liar. So you can't trust me. Anyway, and that might be a lie too, for all you know. It's one of those things.
And I'll tell you, when I read that review where the guy coined the phrase the unreliable narrator, I was like, oh my god, I will remember that forever. I loved it because
unreliable narrator, that's a classic technique, right? I mean, it's a compliment, really. It's a great compliment because
it really sums up writing, I think. In a way, everybody. So,
absolutely, yeah. It's just obviously in the story, it's where it's intentional. Like, yeah, where you eventually see the idea that you can't trust this character or this narrator. I think it might be fun to try to do a third-person story with an unreliable narrator, but that'd be a little trickier.
My plan is for some of the other characters who survive, because a lot of people don't in my book, my books, because I read The Lord of the Rings when I was in junior high, and I read them before I read The Hobbit. So The Hobbit was a big letdown for me because it was like a children's book compared to The Lord of the Rings. But in The Lord of the Rings, my only complaint, one of my few complaints, as a child was, wait a minute, these 9 guys, including 4 hobbits, are fighting, the evil empire, this super powerful being and his minions, the Nazgul. I mean, and nobody dies except the traitor, Boromir. That doesn't make any sense. And I don't kill people off for no reason, but I mean, it just seems reasonable to me. And of course, I wrote the first draft 30 years ago, before Game of Thrones, where people started dying willy-nilly. Now it's common. It wasn't back then, I mean, that was the era that the A-Team was on TV, and they'd be 4 feet away from each other with machine guns shooting at each other, and nobody would get hit. Nobody ever died in anything. So, but of the characters that survive, I do want to have some of them write at least short stories with their version of what happened in some of the scenes in the trilogy. And
fun
challenge, because Dirk right now, he even says at some point, I think, hey, since nobody else has written a book, screw them. My version is the version, is history.
Yeah, history is written by the guy who was there in this case, the guy who wrote the book. Yeah,
and so it is fun, and in the second book, each of the books starts with Dirk kind of talking about the book, like, hey, I'm going to write this book, and
oh, so it's like an old school. It's like an old school, like, eventually we get to the actual story,
right.
Basically,
the first
like first few
look,
chapters.
I'm writing this to feed my ego, or to get women and free drinks. All those things will happen, but that's not why I'm writing the story. And so the second book starts with him talking about reviews. My first book came out, and here's some of the reviews and why they're stupid. And he just...
Oh, that's hilarious.
So it's real meta, and that I enjoy that, self-referential. I mean, kind of the Deadpool school of writing, that, I mean, amuses me and some of my friends.
Hey, no, I mean, it sounds fun to me too. I mean, not to cut you off, but you remind me of actually another former guest of this show. Well, a former guest of this show, I guess. As I say this, you're the current guest. But Stephen Bruce, if you've ever heard of him, Minnesota author.
Yes, I love him.
No, he's great, and his Finglish stuff, where it's like he's translating it, right? He's the guy who translated it from the original whatever Dragarian language, and the original author is this windbag who thinks he's a goofball. Yes. That's awesome.
I mean, I love the Jared, Phoenix a little more.
I prefer Vlad too. I mean,
it's so good. And the sad thing was, I listened to the audiobook of Jared, and the narrator was awful. And I mean, he made it so boring, but I'm like, when I read it, it's so full of life. And this guy's monotone, I mean, it was bad. Yeah. But I do love, I mean, I like audiobooks, but I like reading more.
I prefer, I can't even do audiobooks. And for me now, it's almost strictly ebooks. I'm like weird that way, I guess. I can read print books, but I'm just a brute when it comes to pages. So I prefer to read books that don't look like I destroyed them when I'm done with them.
Well, Kindle Unlimited has been a godsend to me because I read quickly. And so when I was paying for these physical books, I mean...
and they just pile up, too.
Yeah. When we moved, because we had a big house, and we had to sell that to move into my parents' house into a couple tiny rooms until we build a guest house, and even that will be small. I got rid of so many books. I mean, I used to love going to used bookstores, and I would buy crazy things like novelized versions of MASH or All in the
That is pretty crazy.
Mork and Mindy. I had all the, and I
thought
it was hilarious, and they were awful.
So you're kind of like ironically enjoying these books.
Yeah, and I'm like, why have I kept these for 40 years? And so
what are they doing here? Yeah,
of stuff, and because I'm like, I have to carry all this crap, and put it in a bin. I mean, we have the whole basement of my parents' house is full of our stuff that we didn't get rid of, and so I got rid of as much as I could. Which, as a hoarder, my wife and I both are, really bad at giving away anything that we have some memory related to, and it was. I mean, we got rid of so much stuff, but it still wasn't enough. We just couldn't be as I don't know, harsh or thorough as
minimalist. I couldn't cut that.
We're in this tiny space, and 90% of our stuff is in bins and boxes, and I hate it. It's been 6 months, and it'll be another 8 months before the guest house is ready. And I'm like, I don't have any of my things. I hate it. Like,
it sounds rough. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. For one example, I love cooking, so I have many kitchen knives. And I only have a few out, and I feel.
Yeah, you don't have the right knife, and that is sad. I feel for you, sir. As much as I'm making a joke about it, it is annoying. I'm sure. Yeah.
Well, I used to travel a lot for work, and you'd have one bag with you, so you didn't have to check bags. And every time I come home, I'm like, my stuff. And now I'm traveling 100% of the time, and I don't have my stuff.
Yeah, you're on a trip that's going to take over a year, and you're only halfway. You're not even halfway through it yet. That's pretty tough.
It is. I mean, there's a lot of unpleasantness about the living situation we're in, but that is one of the many things that bug me. There's also some great things, but it's
stories for another time, and maybe a different podcast because we're running low on time. So Ron, what have you been reading lately? Or you say you're a big reader, so have you had time to read much lately?
I do. Yeah. I read almost every day, and I tend to read KU stuff, and it's about evenly split between, like, I'll meet people, like I met you, and so now I'm like, I gotta go read something this guy wrote,
Well, I'd appreciate it.
And so that's on I have a giant to be read list, like so many people who love reading, and then also just give me a 6-book, box set on KU, because I read so fast. Sometimes I want something long that will take a while to get through. But I will say, of the things that spring to mind, it's more like, I loved, I very much enjoyed The Wheel of Time. I loved the books for all their faults, but I loved them, and I enjoyed the TV show on Amazon. Very different, but, my wife and I both, enjoyed that. And of course, I love the Marvel stuff. So I loved Hawkeye on Disney Plus, and of all the TV shows they did, I mean, WandaVision was great, Loki was great, but I really enjoyed Hawkeye, and I think it was just more. Maybe it's because I'm an old guy, and he's playing. I mean, he's old as I am.
Yeah, he's a bit one of those, kind of, the back for one last job kind of heroes, right? That kind of thing.
Yeah, and and it was fun. It wasn't the universe at stake. And so it was different and enjoyable. Between Netflix and Amazon Prime and Disney
and KU, between all that stuff, you've got a lot on your plate.
Yeah, there's so much. I mean, we're just living in a golden age of awesome, TV, movies, and books, and it's impossible to keep up with everything. And I have a friend who has, I swear, every streaming service. I'm like, how do you watch anything? How do you pick, one thing to watch out of 2 million choices? It's hard enough just with Netflix, but those are the two things I've enjoyed the most recently.
It's cool.
It's hard because with reading, trying to remember author names and book titles is hard because I go through them so quick. What is that like? Let me ask you. I was going to say, I wonder what that's like, but I have you here. So what is it like to read that fast? It sounds like because I read a little slower. I mean, I can read pretty quickly, but I don't binge read. You know what I mean? Like, I read a few chapters at a time. Yeah, and I can finish, a 100,000 word book in about 3 hours.
Okay, so that's really fast, yeah.
So
by my standards,
really, if I have 3 hours straight, like I'm on a flight from, one side of the country to the other, I can read 3 books. Between the airports and time on the plane. So what I try to do for KU authors or indie authors is when I read something, science fiction, fantasy, whatever, and I think it's awesome, I do a review that I put in my newsletter and on my website, and then I go to Facebook and Twitter and put it all over and try and help, generate sales for those people.
Indies really need the help too. I mean, we all need the help. We can always use it.
Yeah, and I only do it if I love the book. I mean, I won't review something I don't like. I mean,
so it's got to be a 4 or 5 star, basically, or you're not going to be by Amazon standards. Yeah,
like a 5-star, because
indie
authors have a tough enough life. They don't need me critiquing their crap. And,
absolutely,
shitting on them, and so
that's just bad for business too.
And the book is so amazing, and the author is so bad at promoting themselves. And the business side of being an indie, that I'm like, okay, I'm gonna write a fairly long review, and of course I try and make it fun. One lady, I met her in Facebook author groups, and I shouldn't say I met her. I was reading her stuff in Facebook author groups, and her world building was so intense and so deep. I was like, oh my god, it makes me feel like I'm not very in-depth, when before I ran across her, I thought I was very in-depth, but it was some real serious. She would ask a question that was just so detailed, and I'm like, I have no idea about that in my world. And I thought, well, maybe her books suck. Maybe it's all world building, and the characters suck and the story is stupid. And I read the book, her first novel, and it was amazing. So I did. Of course, I can't remember her name.
Yeah, but hey, you already did your part there. You gave her a nice review and all that.
But I went out.
I mean, I wish you could remember her name, because that sounds like it'd be right up my alley. But yeah, maybe you could send me a message about that later if you can dig that out.
Because all I have to go look on my website and I can see her name.
Yeah, but we are out of time. It's been great, Ron. Yeah, sorry. It's been an awesome show, and I have a feeling that I could have you back a bunch of times, because I feel like we barely scratched the surface. But that's the format I chose because I have ADHD. Exactly. So, let's get back. Welcome to the new co-host. No. No, I'm gonna have to have other guests at some point. Anyway, though, like I said, I mean, anytime, Ron. It's been super fun. So thanks for listening, everybody. Oh no, Ron, tell people where they can find your work online. It sounds like, are you in Kindle Unlimited? I'm gonna take a guess that you are.
Yeah, I'm so far Amazon exclusive, and I know I want to do some wide stuff, but the easiest place to find me is my website, my crappy website. www.cathaldi, KATHALDI.com, and that has links to everything, my social media and stuff. I don't update it like I should, just because life, but it has the ways to get a hold of me or sign up for my fantasy newsletter or my humor newsletter.
Cool. Well, thanks for being on the show, Ron. It's been a lot of fun, and it's likewise. And as for this podcast, you can find us at mentalcellarpublications.com. You can find all the episodes there, and you can find more of my you can find my books. They're all on Amazon, pretty much all exclusive, except for Rem's Dream, which you can get wide for free. But the rest of them, you can find all these books at timneedwriter.com/books. And my serials have been delayed for a while, but they'll be coming back. My Vella serials will be coming back at least in February, if not before that. And I know I keep moving the goalposts, but I also keep procrastinating on actually writing new chapters. I'm writing novels, people. I have other things I need to write. Anyway, I know it's not a good excuse, but you can find those at timneedwriter.com/serialized-fiction. Thanks for listening, everybody, and stay safe out there. We'll talk to you again next week. And one of these days, I'll remember to turn the mouse on before I start the outro. Goodbye, everybody.
That tears it.